Rain drifted softly over Warsaw, as if the entire city were exhaling after a long, restless day, and Marek moved through the shimmering streets with the weary, unfocused steps of someone trying not to go home. Neon lights reflected on the pavement in streaks of blue and red, blurring into one another like memories he had tried too long to forget, yet still carried like shadows in the corners of his mind. He told himself he was merely walking to clear his thoughts, but the truth was simpler and far sadder. He felt more at ease in the anonymity of the night than in the silence of his empty apartment. Somewhere across the city, Anna felt a similar pull toward movement, drifting past trams and shop windows with the quiet determination of someone who believed that if she kept going, her past wouldn't catch up. She wrapped her coat tightly around herself, not because of the cold, but because she feared that without it, her loneliness might show in a way strangers could read. When she stepped into a small cafe moments before closing, she hoped only for a brief pause from her thoughts, a warm drink, a moment of stillness. Marek entered a few seconds later, shaking rain from his hair, unaware that he was walking directly into the first shift in his life in years. They approached the counter at the same time, both distracted, both tired, and in the soft collision of their movements, her coffee tipped, spilling across the counter in a dark, imperfect bloom. She gasped, embarrassed. He apologized at the exact same moment, their voices overlapping in an awkward human harmony that pulled both of them briefly out of themselves. The barista sighed, but gave them a gentle, amused look, and something about that small, shared moment softened the tension around them. Marek offered to replace her drink, and she refused, but not sharply, more like someone unaccustomed to being considered. The conversation that followed was hesitant, shaped by pauses and half-formed smiles, yet it held an unexpected sincerity, as though each sensed in the other a familiar kind of quiet ache. The cafe, nearly empty, seemed to shrink around them in a warm, amber glow, isolating their voices from the rain tapping softly on the windows. Though they spoke only of simple things, the weather, the hour, the long day behind them, there was a depth beneath every exchanged glance, a subtle recognition they couldn't yet explain. When the barista finally announced closing time, neither of them moved at first, as if the spell of the moment made it difficult to return to the outside world. But stepping into the rain felt different now. The city no longer seemed as indifferent, and their shared umbrella cast them into a small, intimate world of their own. Marek hesitated before speaking, but when he finally said he wasn't quite ready to end the evening, Anna surprised herself by admitting she felt the same. Their agreement to walk together was quiet, almost shy, yet it carried the unmistakable weight of a beginning neither of them had sought, but both needed more than they knew. They moved down the street side by side, not yet touching, not yet trusting, but already drawn into the strange magnetic pull of an unexpected connection. And as Warsaw stretched ahead of them in flickering lights and drifting rain, the night opened like a door they both sensed would be impossible to close again. They walked without destination, letting the rhythm of the city guide them, and for a long time neither felt compelled to fill the silence. The rain eased into a mist that clung to the air like a thin veil, softening the outlines of buildings and turning the streetlights into hazy halos. Anna watched the reflections dance across puddles, grateful for the comfortable quiet beside a man she technically did not know, yet somehow trusted more than people who had been in her life for years. Marek felt an unfamiliar lightness, as though simply sharing the pavement with her loosened something inside him that had been knotted for too long. He found himself stealing glances, not to admire her beauty, though it was undeniable, but to reassure himself that she was truly there, walking at his side rather than disappearing into the city like everyone else before her. When they reached the Poniatowski Bridge, the city unfolded in a wide sweep of lights shimmering across the Vistula. Anna paused at the railing, resting her hands on the cold metal, and Marek noticed how the wind brushed her hair forward, framing her face in a softness he hadn't expected. The bridge hummed beneath them with the distant vibration of passing trams, a reminder of the restless pulse of Warsaw. And yet, in that moment, the world felt strangely still. He asked a quiet question about her work, and she answered with a faint smile, her voice steady but carrying a sadness that suggested she rarely spoke about herself. She admitted she often stayed up late drawing, not out of passion alone, but because sleep sometimes felt like an invitation to memories she'd rather avoid. Marek listened closely, recognizing a reflection of his own inner fractures in her words. He spoke then, carefully, about the stories he wrote, about the weight of tragedies he reported on, about the way certain endings clung to him long after the articles were published. Anna heard the exhaustion in his voice and sensed the unspoken grief beneath it. Not the grief of a man broken, but of someone who had carried too much for too long. They walked again, slower now, each step punctuated by thoughts they were only beginning to articulate. Their conversation deepened naturally. Dreams abandoned, promises broken, moments that had reshaped them in ways they still struggled to accept. As they drifted through narrow streets lined with shuttered shops, the quiet between them turned tender, threaded with something fragile and tentative. Anna brushed a raindrop from her cheek, and Marek wondered if it had been a tear. She noticed his gaze linger and looked away, embarrassed, but not enough to hide the truth that being seen, truly seen, unsettled her more than the memories themselves. He apologized softly without knowing exactly why, and she shook her head, whispering that some things didn't need explanations. Their steps eventually led them to a mural splashed across a brick wall, a constellation of shapes and colors lit unevenly by a flickering lamp. Anna stopped, tracing the outline of one painted figure with her eyes. "It looks like someone trying to climb out of themselves," she murmured, and Marek felt the words settle heavy in his chest because he understood. They stood there for a long moment, neither speaking, letting the rawness of the night settle around them like a confession neither had yet voiced. When a breeze picked up and carried the faint scent of the river toward them, Anna pulled her coat tighter. Marek noticed her shiver and offered his scarf, a gesture so simple yet intimate it jolted both of them. She hesitated, then accepted it with a gratitude she didn't quite speak aloud. For a moment, their hands brushed, a fleeting touch, accidental yet charged, enough to spark a quiet ache neither dared to acknowledge. The night was deepening, nearing the hour when the city begins to close its eyes, but neither wanted to break the spell that held them. Their connection was still new, uncertain, and unsteady, but real, unmistakably real, and the thought of ending the evening pressed on them with a weight neither wanted to face. And so they kept walking, side by side, into the slowly thinning rain, surrendering to the quiet truth forming between them, that some nights are not just nights, but turning points, the kind that arrive without warning and change everything that comes after. They wandered toward the quieter part of Śródmieście, where the glow of late-night bakeries mingled with the scent of warm bread drifting through cracked windows. Their steps slowed not from fatigue, but from the unspoken understanding that the deeper they went into the night, the deeper they stepped into each other's lives. Marek felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the warning that always came before talking about the pieces of himself he kept hidden. And yet, beside Anna, the fear felt less like a barrier and more like a trembling invitation. She noticed the way he kept adjusting his sleeves, a nervous habit he seemed unaware of, and sensed that he was preparing himself to say something he had not said in a long time. The city around them hummed with its usual restlessness, but for the first time in years, Marek felt as though the noise no longer drowned him. Instead, it seemed to create a kind of shield, giving him permission to speak. They reached the edge of a small square where a fountain murmured faintly beneath a canopy of late summer leaves. Anna sat on the stone ledge, and Marek joined her, leaving a respectful gap between them, though the distance felt increasingly symbolic, a space both of them were slowly learning to cross. She looked up at him with quiet curiosity, and he exhaled, long and uneven, as though releasing a truth he had been holding back since the moment their night began. He told her, in halting fragments, about the woman he once loved, about the illness that came too quickly, and about the helplessness that followed. A helplessness that hollowed him out and left him wandering the city at night, trying to convince himself he could still be someone worth choosing. Anna listened without interrupting, her expression softening with each word, and a warmth spread through him, unfamiliar and disarming, as though he were seeing compassion for the first time in months. When he finished, silence settled between them, not heavy or awkward, but sacred, like the breath held after a prayer. Anna lowered her gaze to her hands, twisting the edge of his scarf between her fingers, and he sensed her preparing to meet his vulnerability with her own. She spoke quietly about the relationship she had lost, not to illness or betrayal, but to the slow erosion of trust that comes when someone decides you are easier to leave than to love. She admitted that she had spent years believing that closeness was something she wasn't built for, that she had perfected the art of stepping back before anyone could step away from her. As Anna spoke, Marek felt a sharp ache of recognition. Her wounds, though different from his, resonated with the same melody of fear and longing that lived within him. A tram rumbled by in the distance, its soft metallic hum pulling their attention back to the present. Anna brushed a strand of hair from her face, her voice trembling slightly as she confessed that meeting him tonight had stirred something she didn't know how to name, something terrifying and hopeful all at once. Marek felt his breath catch, surprised not by her admission, but by how perfectly it mirrored his own unspoken thoughts. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the city felt impossibly still, as though Warsaw itself were pausing to witness the fragile honesty they were discovering in each other. But the intensity of the moment frightened them both. Marek looked away first, afraid of what he might reveal if he held her gaze for too long, and Anna shifted her posture as if reminding herself to breathe. The vulnerability that had brought them closer also threatened to unravel the delicate safety of their connection. They stood, almost at the same time, and continued walking through the square, each of them struggling with the same silent question. What happens now, when the truth is no longer hiding? Their conversation dimmed into quiet reflections, their footsteps echoing against the cobblestones as if marking the distance between where they had been and where they might go. And though they did not speak of it, both felt the shift, subtle, profound, irreversible, the moment when two solitary paths begin to bend, ever so gently, toward each other. They crossed into Powieśla as the night thinned around them, the city growing quieter except for the soft rustle of trees along the riverbanks and the faint hum of distant traffic. The earlier ease in their steps began to falter, not because they had run out of things to say, but because each new silence carried a weight, a fragile tension suspended between yearning and fear. Marek felt the shift before he understood it. The closer they grew, the more he sensed the old instinct rising in him, urging him to retreat before he could be left behind. He clasped his hands in his pockets as if anchoring himself, but the truth pressed through anyway. Connection, even this early, terrified him. Anna noticed the change in his posture, the way his shoulders tightened ever so slightly, and a familiar anxiety fluttered at the edge of her thoughts, whispering that she had again become too visible, too close, too much for someone to stay. They slowed near the river, where the Vistula stretched in a dark, restless ribbon beneath the pale glow of lampposts. Anna leaned against the railing, tracing the cool metal with her fingertips, grounding herself in its firmness. Marek stood beside her, close enough to feel the quiet warmth radiating from her yet far enough to keep the trembling in his chest hidden. She turned to him with a gentle question, nothing probing, nothing dangerous, yet it stirred something raw inside him, a memory of the night he had last allowed someone to see him fully, a night that ended in a silence he had never learned to forgive himself for. He tried to smile, but failed, the expression collapsing under the truth he couldn't speak. Sensing his withdrawal, Anna stepped back slightly, her heart tightening with the certainty that she was losing him to a battle she couldn't name. The fear she had carried for years, the fear of investing in something she would inevitably lose, surged through her like a familiar ghost. She told herself not to care, not to hope, not to let this night weave illusions into her chest. But the more she resisted, the more her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Maybe we should head back," she murmured, though the words tasted bitter, each one a small surrender. Marek heard the shift and felt panic prick at the edges of his mind. He wanted to speak, to tell her that his silence had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with the grief he carried like a second skin. But he couldn't force the words out. He feared that if he opened himself too wide, she would see the brokenness he had spent years trying to contain, and step away before he had the chance to try. So instead, he nodded, a gesture that wounded them both, and they continued walking in quiet parallel, their footsteps suddenly feeling too synchronized, too intimate for two people afraid of the same thing. The night seemed to sense their unraveling. The breeze grew colder, the lights harsher, the shadows more pronounced. Anna wrapped her arms around herself, and Marek felt a sharp pang of guilt, knowing he was the reason warmth had begun slipping from the spaces between them. They reached a narrow street lit by a single golden lamp, its glow pooling gently across the pavement. Anna paused beneath it, her features softened by evening light, though her eyes reflected a loneliness she thought she had hidden well. Marek stopped a few steps ahead, torn between fleeing and returning to her side. For a suspended moment, neither moved. The city, usually alive with noise and urgency, felt eerily still, as if Warsaw herself were waiting to see what choice would be made. Anna looked at him with a vulnerability that made his breath catch. It was the look of someone asking a question she didn't dare voice. And Marek, caught in the storm of his own fears, found himself unable to answer it. He stepped back instead. Only by an inch, but enough. Enough for Anna to understand that he was retreating. Enough for her to feel the old ache rise like a tide she had fought her whole life to resist. She lowered her gaze so he wouldn't see how deeply the small gesture cut, and he turned away so she wouldn't see the regret that immediately overwhelmed him. They resumed walking, but now the space between them widened with each step. Not physically, but emotionally, like a soft thread stretching toward breaking. And though neither planned to say goodnight yet, both felt that dawn, when it came, would demand a reckoning they weren't ready for. They reached the edge of Śródmieście just as the sky began to loosen its darkness, the first faint strokes of gray drifting over the rooftops like a quiet warning that their night was almost over. Anna felt the change in the air before she saw it, that fragile hour when night is still clinging to the world, yet morning is already pressing against it, demanding an ending. Her steps slowed, not from exhaustion, but from the instinctive dread that whatever fragile bond had formed between them might dissolve as easily as mist under daylight. Marek walked a little ahead, caught in his own turmoil, each stride stiff with the tension of a man fighting himself more than the moment. He could feel her distance behind him, like a soft echo pulling at his thoughts, and the knowledge that he was the cause of it made every breath feel heavier. When they stopped at a small riverside overlook, the silence that had once felt peaceful now hung between them with unsettling weight. Anna leaned against the railing, her gaze fixed on the faint shimmer of the Vistula as it caught the dim light of approaching dawn. She didn't speak, not because she had nothing to say, but because she feared any words might reveal how deeply the night had mattered to her. Marek stood beside her, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. He was aware of her quiet withdrawal, aware that the space he had created earlier was widening into something he might not be able to close again. He wanted to tell her everything, the fear, the guilt, the wound that still shaped his days, but the words refused to come, trapped beneath layers of sorrow he couldn't yet unravel. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, not looking at him. It was a simple question, but it carried a tremor of hope and dread, as though she were bracing for an answer that might undo her. Marek opened his mouth to respond, but nothing emerged. The truth was too raw, and the lies were too cruel. His silence became its own confession. Anna exhaled slowly, a tremor slipping through her breath, and he could hear in it every past disappointment she had survived. She turned her head away, blinking back a sting in her eyes, convincing herself she should have known better than to believe something real could grow from a single night. The faint glow of sunrise edged along the horizon, washing the river in muted pink and silver. Marek finally spoke, but the words came out fractured, barely audible. "I don't know how to do this." Anna stiffened, the ache in her chest tightening until it felt almost physical. She understood his meaning too well. The fear of opening their hearts only to watch everything fall apart. Yet hearing it made the ground beneath her feel suddenly unsteady. She told herself to walk away, to preserve what little dignity she had left, but her feet remained planted beside him, held in place by the quiet truth that she did not want this night to end in regret. He took a step closer, as though fighting his own instinct to withdraw, and the proximity only deepened her confusion. "Tonight," he whispered, struggling to form the rest of the sentence. "It meant more than I expected." Anna closed her eyes, letting the words settle over her like a fragile balm. But when she opened them, the dawn light revealed how scared he looked, not of her, but of himself. She realized, with a mix of tenderness and sorrow, that he wasn't rejecting her. He was terrified of wanting something he didn't believe he deserved. Her voice came out soft but steady. "Then don't run from it." The plea was unintentional, born from the exhaustion of pretending she didn't care, and the moment it left her lips, she wished she could take it back. Marek's expression shifted, not with anger or dismissal, but with a deep, soul-worn vulnerability. He looked away again, jaw tightening as though he were holding back a storm. They stood in silence as the city brightened inch by inch, each passing moment stretching the distance between who they were at midnight and who they were becoming at dawn. Anna felt her heart straining with every breath, caught between fear and longing, while Marek battled the instinct to retreat into the isolation he knew too well. And though neither of them said it, both felt the shift, a decisive turning point neither could ignore. Finally, as the first tram screeched awake in the distance, Marek spoke her name, softly, reverently, as if tasting it for the first time. Anna turned toward him, her eyes searching his, waiting for him to choose. His expression trembled with something raw and unsteady, poised on the edge of confession. But he couldn't finish. Not yet. And in that unfinished moment, fragile, suspended, the world held its breath, leaving the choice of what came next hanging between them like the thin line of dawn splitting the Warsaw sky. Morning unfolded slowly over Warsaw, painting the buildings in soft gold that felt too gentle for the weight lingering between them. Anna walked beside Marek without speaking, their steps quiet on the pavement as the city awakened around them. Trams screeched into motion, early commuters hurried past, and bakery windows glowed warm with fresh bread. Yet the world's return to routine only made their night feel more ephemeral, as though what had happened between them might dissolve in daylight if neither of them fought to hold on. Marek kept glancing at her from the corner of his eye, guilt tightening inside him like a knot, while Anna tried to steady her breathing, afraid that even a small misstep might break whatever fragile connection remained. They reached a narrow pedestrian bridge overlooking the river, the same river that had listened to so many of their confessions just hours before. Anna stopped, resting her hands on the railing, her gaze wandering across the shimmering water. Marek stood a step behind her, every instinct urging him to move closer, but every fear reminding him of the cost of vulnerability. The silence between them deepened, but this time it wasn't the comfortable quiet of shared understanding. It was the silence of two people teetering on the edge of a decision they were terrified to make. Anna finally exhaled, soft and unsteady, as if releasing the last trace of hope she allowed herself to feel. "I'm trying," Marek said quietly from behind her, his voice raw and unguarded. Anna froze, turning just enough to see him without facing him fully. His expression was pained, his eyes searching hers for a forgiveness he hadn't yet earned. "I just don't know how to do this anymore." She swallowed hard, not because his words hurt, but because they were honest, painfully, beautifully honest. "You don't have to know," she whispered. "You just have to want to try." Her words shook something loose inside him. He stepped closer until he stood beside her, their arms nearly touching, the smallest distance echoing with the potential of something new. Marek looked out at the river, the memories of the past swirling in his chest like currents he had fought for years. He thought of the woman he lost, the promises he failed to keep, and the guilt that had woven itself into his heartbeat. For so long, he had believed that moving forward would mean betraying her memory. But standing beside Anna now, he realized that staying frozen wasn't a tribute. It was a prison. Anna waited, silent and patient, offering neither pressure nor retreat. She simply stood with him, sharing the weight of his hesitation. Slowly, Marek reached for the railing, his hand brushing against hers, and when she didn't pull away, he let his fingers rest lightly beside her own. The touch was barely there, feather soft, but it felt like the beginning of something he had long believed impossible. "Last night wasn't nothing," he finally said, the words trembling with vulnerability. "And I don't want it to fade just because the sun came up." Anna's breath caught, not from surprise, but from relief so profound it almost hurt. She turned toward him fully now, letting him see the emotion in her eyes. "It doesn't have to fade," she answered, "unless we let it." The morning sun rose higher, catching in the river and scattering light across their faces like a quiet blessing. Marek took a deeper breath, as though preparing to step into a world he had avoided for years. He reached for her hand, not timidly this time, but with intention, and Anna let her fingers slide into his, the gesture sealing something that had been forming long before either of them admitted it. For the first time in years, Marek felt the weight in his chest ease, just slightly, like the first crack in long frozen ice. And Anna, standing beside him in the golden hush of morning, realized she no longer felt like someone easy to leave. She felt like someone worth staying for. They walked together along the riverbank, hand in hand, not speaking, not rushing, allowing the moment to breathe. Warsaw hummed around them, alive, restless, eternal, yet somehow it felt different now, as though the city itself had witnessed their night and chosen to remember it. For two people who had spent years hiding behind their wounds, choosing this fragile beginning felt like a quiet revolution. The story did not end with certainty. It ended with courage. Two souls deciding that fear would no longer dictate the shape of their lives. And as they moved forward into the day, the city that never slept and never forgot, carried their footsteps gently, as though promising that this time they did not have to walk alone.
If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, even quietly, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us create more slow, emotional love stories like this one. New stories are coming soon,